And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Macmillan's Book Plus Author series. We're so excited to see everyone attending tonight. Thank you for joining us. I am Meg Collins, and I'm on the author events team here at Macmillan. And I have just a couple housekeeping items before I let these two take it away. So first of all, I'd like to thank all the bookstores who partnered with us on this event today. If you have not already, please check out the link that I'll be dropping in the chat below to purchase a copy of Orphan X or possibly another of the books in the series from one of our partners. We've got the chat box below to talk with each other, and we also have the ask a question box below me where you can put any questions that you'd like answered during the second half of this event. And we'll also be keeping an eye on both for general disruption, and we reserve the right to delete any inappropriate or offensive comments or questions and to ban from the event anyone who's being disruptive. So please keep this in mind and treat Greg, Mark, and your fellow viewers with respect and politeness. And now moving on to the main event, Gregg Hurwitz is the New York Times bestselling author of more than a dozen novels, including the #1 international bestseller Orphan X, the first in this series of thrillers featuring Smoak. He has also written young adult novels, The Rains, and its sequel, The Last Chance. His books have been shortlisted for numerous literary awards, graced top 10 lists, and have been translated into 28 languages. He's also a New York Times bestselling comic book writer, having penned stories from Marvel, like Wolverine and the Punisher, and DC, such as Batman. Additionally, he has written screenplays from many major studios and written, developed, and produced television for various networks. Today, he's joined by #1 New York Times bestselling author Mark Greaney, whose debut international thriller, The Gray Man, was published in 2009. He's now written 11 books in the best-selling series, including the recent book Relentless and the forthcoming Sierra 6. A feature film of The Gray Man starring Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, and Billy Bob Thornton has been completed and is scheduled to release next year. Mark is also the #1 New York Times bestselling author or co-author of 7 Tom Clancy novels. He collaborated directly with Tom Clancy on 3 Jack Ryan novels before Tom's death in 2013. Welcome, both of you, and we're thrilled to have you with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're going. How's it going, Greg?
It's good, man. Thank you for agreeing to come on here. I love the Gray Man series, and it's good to see you. And I'm glad to have you showing up. I'm looking forward to Sierra 6. I think it comes out 2 weeks into February. Is that right?
Yep, the 15th.
Yeah, so we're on book tour together quite a bit, which is nice because we get to ping into each other like pinballs now and then on tour.
Yeah, I hope so.
Maybe if the world is sufficiently resumed, we'll get to do it again.
I know. I'm hoping next year will be a little bit more open anyway, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here. This is like when I was asked, I just thought I'll just sit and talk to Greg for an hour. This is how we socialize these days. Right. I haven't seen you in a couple of years because of shutdowns and whatnot. How's that going for you? How have you found that as far as your productivity and everything else? Have you been able to just sort of soldier through, or is it
a bit? It definitely has been a bit tricky, but I also feel like it's a little bit like a pandemic that novelists get the better end of, given that a routine isn't massively altered. But of course I wish there was more, it was easier to travel, it was easier to do other stuff, but it's pretty good. I mean, I got plenty of bourbon in the house, and I got my computer and I got my office, and so that's that's a big part of we get to do this pretty uninterrupted, so a lot of the things around it change, but the writing and the writing schedule stay the same. So yeah,
like it's psychologically it's a blow, but at the same time that physically we're so lucky that we don't have to change it as many people do.
It's a wonderful job.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sort of here. We're here to talk about the Orphan X series, and I'm going to get into that. But let's start. You had some very big news. I read about you in Variety yesterday, or the day before yesterday, maybe. Is that something you can? Hopefully, it's something you can tell everyone. If Variety's talking about it, you have to have the muzzle off.
Okay. So I wrote about 8 Hitchcockian standalone thrillers before I wrote Orphan X. I mean, one of the things with Orphan X is I knew it would be a series, and I knew I was sort of afraid to dive in because I really wanted to wait until I had my handle on it, because I grew up like you, loving, Clancy and Bourne and Jack Ryan and Jack Reacher and all of those. And to write a series, as you're living with a character more than we are with real people in the world, in our share of hours. So I kept kind of putting it off till I had enough of a handle on who I wanted that character to be, which we'll talk about. Yeah. And so I was writing, for a long time, really happily, these kind of every man and one every woman thriller. Yeah. To catch an ordinary person on the worst day of their life, like these big Hitchcocky, big hook opening thrillers. And they were a blast. And so I recently partnered with Scott Frank, who's a wonderful screenwriter. He's adapted, everyone from Philip K. Dick to Lawrence Block to Elmore Leonard. And we're going to be producing them together, all 8 of them, ideally in a series of films. We want to get, younger writers to help them break in and use these stories as a template to kind of have Scott and I oversee and work on the books and help to produce them and help with the screenplay, and to partner with some new and interesting voices of people who might otherwise have a tough time breaking in. So I'm really looking forward to it. I admire Scott's work so much. His last project was Queen's Gambit for Netflix. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much my favorite thing I think I've seen on, in years. I just completely adored it. And so I'm looking forward to it. It's one of those ones that feels like it's just going to be a blast. Like I'm only thinking about it and looking forward to it in pure kind of creative terms. And so I can't wait to jump in. And now you have a movie coming from Netflix, right?
I do. I'm not a producer on it, which is probably a good thing. I'm gonna talk to you about your schedule and how you organize stuff, because I can tell you're very energized, not just about optioning your books, but the hands-on approach that you're going to have to them, which is really fantastic. And it's going to, I'm sure, be very fulfilling. Obviously you have some experience out there, so you know how to speak that language. So that's really good. I'm happy for you. I'm excited. You've got everything you touch, it seems to be turning to gold. So let's just keep that up. It's fantastic. So I want to talk about Orphan X. So the questions I have are, your editor Keith sent me Dark Horse, which comes out in February. So I got an early look at that. I'm about 120 pages into it. It's fantastic. The writing is beautiful. Like, I've emailed another friend of mine who you probably know, who's an author. I won't say who. And I was just like, damn it, this is good. It's like, you get that pang of annoyance, and you're like, that's good. It's very, it's just really well done. And I can't wait to see where that goes. But let's go back to the beginning. Oh yeah. Can you tell us about the inception of Orphan X? I know you've done some sort of revenge stories before in comics and in books, stuff like that. So what was it? What did you come up with? What was the first kernel that said, okay, this could be a series? Was it the character? Was it the situations the character found themselves in?
Well, it's funny. Everything for me is embedded in character. Like one of the things I always observe is, like, not everyone will name their favorite like action scene in a James Bond movie, but everyone knows how he takes his martini, right? Right. And so I had to make sure that the character was sufficiently distinguished that when I moved him through plots and action sequences and, stories and dynamics and relationships, that he would interact with them in a way that I knew him enough that that his engagements would be unique, right? Like, because there's something that constitutes, you know this well. There's a gray man. There's stuff in a gray man novel that wouldn't make sense and would be out of place in a Jack Reacher novel, right? There's different things, and we need to really have a handle on that, or else we're just writing sort of imitations of other stuff. Right. For me, there was a couple things that started it, and one of them was I have a lot of friends and acquaintances, as do you, in the Spec Ops community. I do a lot of research in that, and so I was familiar with a lot of Black Ops programs, and there's been books and stories. Morel has written beautifully about this, La Femme Nikita, about kids being taken out of foster homes, or kids who were essentially unwanted being raised as assassins. Yeah. And I thought, what if that happened? But what if for my main character, Evan Smoak, what if it's not just this like horrible thing that put him in the world at the center of a lot of, stress and death and anguish and operational skill, but what if it also is the best thing that ever happened to him, right? If his handler, Jack Johns, was the first person to actually treat him with regard, the skinny little 12-year-old kid out of a East Baltimore foster home. And so for me, there was a line that Jack tells him when he chooses him. And he says to Evan, the hard part isn't going to be making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And I thought that tension and the fact that Evan was put into the world in a certain way was sort of at the center of it. And as I started to write the books, I realized a couple other things. One, he sort of is outside the ordinary world. He's kind of got his face up to the glass, seeing all these ordinary people living ordinary lives that he can never participate in full. But what he can do is to protect them and to preserve for them that. And there's also a lot of fun and humor that caught me a bit by surprise, but it was always there, in that I toggle him back and forth from these sort of extreme, action suspense scenes into the real world. So he'll come home, bleeding from his arm and get yanked into an HOA meeting where they're debating like new carpeting for the lawn.
Right.
There was a lot of fun where I was like, what if I could take somebody who are like one of these archetypal characters we've grown up with, but he has to live in the real world where you and I live. We have to watch him go home and try to deal with all the complexities of human life when he was
and his OCD and just all the things that he has to navigate when he's not, chasing the plot down.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, it's like his operational training taught him a level of perfection. And I think that's where his OCD loop can get in the way. He has these 10 assassin's commandments that were handed down to him. And the second one is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so it's about like complete operational perfection.
Right.
And so that can become an OCD loop because that can be taken to an extreme that's difficult. And of course, when people are involved, people are always messy and textured and throw you off your schedule. And so he's, whenever he has to engage with real people, it gets trickier for him. And he's challenged. One of the lines I use early on is he doesn't speak the strange language of intimacy. So
yeah, that's fantastic. So like my next question, these are some of the questions that I kind of jotted down. I usually do a little bit of preliminary like research before I talk to somebody, but with you, I literally just jotted down questions. Like I'm gonna pick his brain about this stuff because he can't not answer them. It's not like we're in a bar somewhere and you say none of your business, So it was like my next question was how do you your Markman series is 8 books, is that right? 7 or 8 books, and then your Orphan X, you're at book 7. They're all sort of standalone. People ask me this, and I don't really have a good answer. What is your answer of is there a blueprint for making it a standalone and yet part of a bigger whole, or how do you approach that?
Look, I feel like our job in a lot of ways is to fill the obligations of both, right? We have to welcome new readers on board and give enough background that they'll understand and have a place in it. But I also, like you and the range of work you've done within the Gray Man, I don't want to write the same book over and over again, right? I need them to move. I need there to be development. And so it's sort of this trick where you want to have enough for anybody to come on board and anybody to get into the book and the story and have their bearings to understand it and catch up and have it be self-contained. But I also want to have a growing and deepening richness and interplay with the characters so that people who are returning are feeling like they're sensing an evolution. With the character, and they're going deeper and they're getting to know him better and they're understanding why the stakes are bigger for him in certain plots. Right.
Yeah. Like just sort of giving all different types of readers what they need and what they want in the story. It's a little bit like I try really hard not to explain my setup the same way each time.
That's right.
Not to spend any more paragraphs on it in the next book than I did in the last book. It's like you come up with a different way to skin a cat, I guess. But so following that about keeping them standalone, how do you, and this is a huge problem for me, how do you keep your canon organized? How do you know something that you put in book 6 is not going to violate something that you said in book 2? Do you mechanically or organically or a combination?
It's a combination. I mean, now and then I'll go back and I have notes like, you know, Josephine Morales, 16-year-old hacker, who's Evan's, you know, kind of number two. He was stuck having to protect her at one point, and she's become, you know, that's become an important relationship for him. She's got a dimple in one cheek, you know, and I'll go back, make sure that I get the cheek right. Right. So there's some stuff that I know, and I keep some lists with the distinguishing characteristics, like what's the square footage of the condo, right? How many square feet are in the vault? What's the list of vodkas that Evans already had?
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. And part of it is I have all the books and files, and I'll go back and search sometimes. Even now and then, I don't know if you've done this, but like I don't even want to repeat a particular phrase sometimes. And I'll be like, if I use this, I want to really make sure that I'm new, because I feel like there's a level of respect that we have to show readers who are going forward that I don't want to have, if you know, something that showed up before. So I try and spend a good amount of time doing it. There's a couple things that have just fallen through the cracks. I have a wonderful copy editor too, who in fact I dedicated one of the books to. She's just wonderful and makes me look smarter and more competent than I am, which is always the aim of working with anyone we collaborate with.
Yeah.
How do you do it? I mean, how do you handle it?
Well, it's a mess. I mean, an example I give is, I think in the first book, I say my hero is from near Jacksonville, Florida. And then in like the third book, I misremembered that. And it was published saying he was born near Tallahassee. So, you know, to clean that up, I just looked at a map and just picked the city right in the middle and put him from there. And I've been like asked by the newspaper in that area, you know, it's like, what is your relationship with Glen St. Mary, Florida? You know, and I'm like, I got an answer, but you're not going to love it.
My relationship is covering my incompetence. That's what
exactly.
I had a few of those. I mean, it's funny. I had a book that came out, and it's like, I talk about East Philly, and there is no East Philly, you know, and it's like, so I have fixed it, you know, and funnily, humorously enough, I actually dedicated it to a friend of mine, Marshall Herskovitz, who's a writer who's from Philly. So it's like even more insulting. But then, you know, as you know, it comes up and I fix it for the ebook and future printings, but someone's always going to get that hardcover out of the library and let me know about it.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
Rightly so. So, you know, as I always say, it's like, I don't want to make gun mistakes. I have an armorer go through a lot of that for me, because we'll hear about that.
Yeah.
You know, and you never want to kill a cat. And if you obey those two rules, you know, you might have a future in crime fiction.
Yeah. And you know, I'm a gun guy, so I get away with saying this, like, gun guys and women or whatever can just be jerks. I mean, it's just like, if you get the muzzle velocity of something off by 10 feet a second or something, you're going to hear about it. And it's not just where other things people sort of like, if you get concrete, you've probably gotten this before. If you say cement when you mean concrete, oh my gosh, everyone that knows the difference is going to send you an email. But there's something about gun people. We're very
guns. Yeah, I mean, that's another solution that I have. I mean, I've shot a lot, you know, and I have a couple friends who have been very generous with their time, who are, you know, former SEALs, right? I have demolition breachers, I have different people, and I basically go to people. This is for everything. You know, if it's an area of expertise, I want to get it as close to right as I can.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then the other trick is, we don't want to put too much research in it. Because I have a lot of readers who aren't gun people, right? They aim to write like a techno, you know, sort of ordnance thriller either. And so it's all about getting the balance where there's enough telling detail. You know, I think a lot about, you know, the TV show ER, which I liked quite a bit. And as they're rushing people around, there's a sort of pattern of how medical terms and what they're doing, and you can piece it together and follow along. But the point is that we're observers in it. They're not delving into it. You don't feel like you get the whole iceberg. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Everyone doesn't have to understand everything that's being said. It's got to be just enough to paint the ambiance, right? And to kind of carry the reader across that suspension of disbelief so that it feels real and not dwell too much.
Yeah, it just, you can establish the credibility without, you know, people having to know everything. You know, in the 80s and 90s, the techno thriller was something different, you know, than thrillers are today. I really don't think you get away with that. The newer Clancy books or whatever do not have, you know, 12 pages of a nuclear detonation. You know, it's 1 page or a half a page or something like that. So, but I think,
and there's a challenge. There's a challenge to that. You know, in screenwriting, teaches this in some ways, because you go from 400 pages of final product with books are my first and foremost love. And they're the spine of my career, always has been.
Yeah.
But in scripts, you have so little room. And so you're always trying to be artful. You're trying to make everything count. And it's always an interesting mindset when I'm working in a script to come back to a novel and trying to figure out, like, how can I capture something in a way that feels like it's vibrant and full of life and paints a picture without laying out all of the geography of it. Robert B. Parker does that wonderfully, right? His books are really sparse, but he the person, the house, the room. And someone else who's just fabulous, who, I read and talk about all the time, is Megan Abbott. Like, even though she's she's not like as much of a hardcore thriller writer, she's in crime fiction. But everywhere that you're going in those books, and yet she doesn't belabor anything for a moment. She's just like creating a world around you that you're walking through at the pace of the plot and the story. And I think that's always the aim, is how do we keep readers moving through and walking through this world that we're trying to create around them.
Yeah. Well, okay. My next question here, we've talked about how you keep things in the background, or, like from the past together. What about things in the future? Do you plot ahead multiple books? Short story, first time I met Tom Clancy, I sort of asked him, assuming I knew the answer to the question about how far along he had the Clancy series from the beginning. I mean, the Jack Ryan series from the beginning. And he went into great detail about how he did have it, mapped out for several books from the very beginning. Whereas me, I was just trying to finish a book. I wasn't looking down the road like that. You're 7-8 books into Orphan X now. Do you know what you want them to do in the macro sense, if not the micro sense, for the next couple of books, or how does that work?
I do. It's funny, whenever it gets close to the line, like there's been a few, generally, I always know the next book before I finish one, right? Sometimes I know 2 or 3 ahead, just even rough notions.
Yeah.
Now and then I've been writing the book and I don't know what's coming next. And one of the things that's funny with our job that we don't talk about as often, I think, is we have such a weird job because it's different every time out that we sit down. There's a muscle memory that we've built up and that we work at, but the dialogue's different every time. What's going to make a character come to life is different. And there's always, well, maybe it's just me, but I feel like there's always some concern that you might wake up and just not have it and everything feels flat.
Right.
Every time I've been worried about, well, what am I going to write next that's going to really excite me? 2/3 of the way through a book, it's always come.
Yeah.
You know what's next. Now with Orphan X, what's funny is the 6th in the series is called Prodigal Son. And one of the things about Evan Smoak is he was raised as an assassin. And before I even begin Orphan X, the first book, he's already left the program, right? His moral compass collided with the program, and he helps people pro bono as the nowhere man. He's like a pro bono assassin. People in desperate need can call the phone if the odds of the world are stacked against them, and he'll come in and do anything to, get them back to a version of their life and pull them out of the trauma that they're in. And when I first was pitching the series to my editor, my agent, I said, look, there could be all these stories that come in, and sometime down the line, that phone's going to ring and the person on the other end is going to say, Evan, it's your mother, who he's never met. He's an orphan, foster home. And it was funny because everyone loved, like my agent loved that. She kept bringing it up. And so, sure enough, that's something that you need to be a good ways into a series to take a personal detour like that. I had to kind of set the template of what the usual Nowhere Man stories are.
Right.
But that was the 6th novel. I always knew I was getting there. I just wasn't ready until I'd written 5 novels to feel like, now it's time to tell that story. Right. And so sometimes I have these kind of like notions or handholds in the plots. And then as I write my way into them and up to them, more of the world will sort of come into view for me. Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about early influences. I know that you studied Shakespeare. You've more than studied Shakespeare. You've done comic books. You've done screenplays. What was it growing up that tuned you into this genre, or writing in general? Like, what was it that you loved that you look back on and say, well, that sort of built me a little bit as a writer?
Well, a couple of things. When I was growing up, I was not allowed to watch television, which I thought was a crime against humanity.
Sure.
So I was at the library all the time. I mean, twice a week. The only TV I was allowed to watch were when the Red Sox were playing, because my dad's from Boston and that's religion. And I was allowed to watch Hitchcock movies. So, Hitchcock to me is always, one of the people in the pantheon who sets the standard for me. Because it's like, well, is Hitchcock literary or commercial? It's like, he doesn't care. He's like Dickens or Shakespeare, right? He's both. He fulfills all the requirements of both. But so I read when I was, early elementary school, Hardy Boys. I loved Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. Yeah. And then by 5th grade, I was deeply into Stephen King. Like horror just grabbed me. Yeah. I remember particularly reading Salem's Lot, which to me was terrifying. I remember my parents were gone. I was reading it, under my bed. I was 22 years old. No, I'm just kidding. I was in 5th grade. And I just heard like crunching footsteps outside the window, which to this day, I don't know what it is. But I remember having this moment of clarity. Like I loved those books. I love the covers. I mean, I just love books. I thought in books. I thought in stories. Yeah. I remember thinking, it's amazing to me that this guy who lives across the country, right across the years, can put together a collection of familiar words in an unfamiliar order and elicit all this emotion in me. Yeah. Right. It just was like a key to, that fit some kind of lock in me that just opened it up. And I know we have so many, wonderful booksellers here. We have like all of us who are writers too. It's like, we all felt that way. There was something that felt almost more real. Like I could access more of myself when I was reading sometimes than being in the world. And so I loved it, and then as I grew up, I studied a lot of, English lit. I was very into Faulkner and Fitzgerald. And, you mentioned I studied Shakespeare, and Shakespearean tragedies are very thrillery, right? They're tales of lust, intrigue, and murder. They're highly structured. They're borrowed forms, right? Every play except The Tempest is reconstituted the way that, James M. Cain was reconstituted by Robert B. Parker, is reconstituted by Robert Crais, right? We take similar stories and tropes and we play with them. Right. And Shakespeare was doing that. And his aim was to write to a whole cross section of Elizabethan society. It was to put asses in chairs to sell out the globe, right? He wanted sales. He wanted to talk to people. And he just did it magnificently. And the other thing for me that's always, obviously essential in any tragedy, but is like wonderfully alive in Shakespearean tragedy, is that the flaw of the central character that drives the plot, that's the driver. Like he doesn't write stories about awful things that happen to ordinary people. Right. Yeah. Because that's just the real world. That's pancreatic cancer, right? That's a plane crash. Yeah. But so that's the thing where, the hook for us is when the structure and the story is coming out of the character and the character's choices and who the character decides to be. And that also means the character interacts with, like, one of the templates that I always try and engage is, how is an Orphan X action scene different than any other action scene, right? How would he interact with the situation? What is his dialogue that's different than how Jack Ryan or the Gray Man or anyone else would respond to? And so it's trying to keep getting those handles that everything stitches back to that. And once those things are aligned, where like a big action move is also aligned with a big character choice, that's always for me is like the double trampoline bounce of like, we got it, right? That moment. And that's a lot of the hard work and the hard figuring, as right? Because we don't type, like, you don't go into your books and have a character arc and then figure out a plot and that they're separate and you try and time it. When you're sitting down, all those ass and chair hours that you're putting in are to get those knitted together in a way, right? And that's the tapestry of a story that we feel like we can engage with more. Yeah.
Well, what is your discipline? You do screenplays, you've done graphic novels, you do novels, obviously. How do you sort of select projects? Is it just an idea for a story and then you decide the best way to tell it, or are you writing for hire, or how do you decide, like, what next year are you going to? What have you got planned, not specifically for next year, but like, just how do you look at that?
Well, it's funny because it announces itself more and more. And when I've had projects where I've wasted time, like if I took something out for a TV pitch, it's never been like, I'm paying more and more attention. And this is true for everybody in your jobs and in our lives, right? I pay attention more and more to having when the process is kind of happening naturally. Like anytime when I was younger in my career, it's like, oh, I could sell this as a TV show. Let me take it out. It's like, that's not how to make a choice. That's not how to spend time.
Right.
And so more and more, if I pay attention, I think the stories will announce themselves for what form they're best suited to, which sounds a little precious. And I don't mean it preciously, but there's, you know, like I have a comic coming out next week called Knighted. That's a new comic book series with the company I'm working with. I'm working on something else that lends itself exactly to graphic novel format.
Right.
But, you know, on the other hand, I had a movie that just came out on Netflix where the Gray Man movie is going to be coming out, which is very exciting. And mine was called Sweet Girl. It stars Isabel Merced and Jason Momoa. And that was a straight script. I co-wrote it with a friend, Philip Eisner. Everything about it was visual. Everything about it it just lent itself to that. The way it worked, the way the plot turned, the visuals on it. It's actually not a story that I could tell in a novel. There's a twist in it that it has to be a movie. So I'm working on another screenplay also with Philip Eisner. That was my writing partner on Sweet Girl. He wrote Event Horizon and Mutant Chronicles, and he's a wonderful screenwriter. And so we're working on something else called Sabine that we're rewriting now and trying to kind of get that ready. And then I'm very focused and I'm very inside the world of Orphan X, right? Like Dark Horse is ready. That's in the can, so to speak. I'm, deep into the next one. I'm thinking about what's coming after that. And so I feel like a bigger part of my life and attention is just like, I feel as I move into the series that I'm more and more interested and captivated with what I can do with it in the character. And so I'm really grateful for that, because you want to be excited. You want to figure out what you can do new to bend the rules to keep it interesting. Because if we don't keep it interesting, if we're bored writing, they're going to be bored reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's true. So you could probably talk about this for hours. Don't. The difference between writing a screenplay and writing a novel, is it, I sort of have two questions. I tried writing a screenplay once. It ended up being a really good story that I published, but it was nothing like a screenplay, and it didn't end up being a screenplay. It ended up becoming a book. Do you feel like it exercises different parts of your brain? Do you feel when you switch from one to the other, you sort of have to retune things or at this point in your career, having done this for 20 something years, is it just a thing where you just go to work on Tuesday and you're writing a different medium than you were on Monday, and it works?
First of all, I can't believe you said 27 years, and I was like, hang on a minute, that can't be right. And then I realized that is right, and that's a shocking number to hear spoken aloud.
You started at about the age where I thought, wow, that'd be cool to be an author, and it took me 22 years to get published. So you basically got it done about the time I got.
Well, I started early, but it's you've had a magnificent run also. So I think you waited till the timing was right for you, for sure.
Yeah.
So look, screenplays, it is different muscles at this point. Like, one of the things that I think about is it's sort of like being, it's a different muscle, but it helps to be in writing shape overall. You know what I mean? So you can translate some of the muscles, but it's a little bit like switching events in the decathlon. You got to kind of like gear up for a different event a little bit. There's different rules of engagement. There's different muscles that you use, but being fit overall helps. And so, and with screenplays, what's interesting is, I mentioned earlier, a novel is 400 pages of final content. A script is 120 pages with lots of white on the page. Yeah. It is essentially an invitation to collaborate. Right? It's a recipe for a story. And so there's two ways that it goes. Either, you get the right actors, you get the right director, you get the right hair, makeup, right? Set decorators on board, and everyone's game raises the story and brings nuance and makes it great. Or it's a negative feedback loop and it just spirals down, and it's about egos and turf wars and everything shitty. And so, I've been more and more aware to try and insinuate myself and to contribute to a system that's moving the right direction, right? Because there's a whole way of trying to figure that out. But to give you an example, in my first novel, my first movie that was made was called The Book of Henry. and it starred Naomi Watts. I actually wrote the rough draft of that at 21 years old. I wrote it before, back at the very beginning of my career.
My 13-year-old stepdaughter loves that movie, by the way. So that's,
well, thank you. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there was this scene there's a speech that I'd written, very emotional speech, and I'd literally rewritten it for decades, right? It took me all that time to get it made, decades and decades. And on the day, it's being shot, I was watching the dailies, and Naomi has this exchange, Sarah Silverman's in the movie, and she stops, and there's this extraordinary moment where this whole constellation of emotions moves across her face. And I realized in that moment that she did everything that needed to be conveyed emotionally with a look.
Yeah.
And then I knew at that point too, that the speech or the dialogue that had been carefully and meticulously prepared for years would probably wind up on the cutting room floor because she did it all with a look. And that has to be something that if I'm smart, which I was catching up to being smart in that moment, so I had a realization to go, she never would have got there without all that work that got there. But now that she's doing this in a different way, that's her art, that's her craft. And you've elevated it now. And anytime you can tell something without words in a screenplay is a good. And so there's a different sort of handoff as opposed with books where we're trying to get the language just right. We're trying to get the ambience and the pacing right. Like there's so much we are hair and makeup, right? We're set design. We're the location scout. We're the actor. We're the directors. You don't need Billy Bob Thornton and Ryan Gosling. You're all of them, right? And what you wrote there had to be a sufficient template and world to bring in talent of that caliber to tell your story. And what you want is for them to tell and figure out how to interpret and translate that story in ways that are different and suited to the new medium.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see it, man. When's it released? Do we have a date?
I don't have a date. I think next summer. So it's going to be a little while. So they get that done. Yeah. I'm going to ask some reader questions or some viewer questions here, or reader questions. Well, first I'm going to ask you, someone on Facebook asked me to ask you this. What is Evan Smoak's 8th commandment? What is Orphan X's 8th commandment?
Never kill a kid.
There you go. I've passed on that information.
And he's very tempted at the beginning of the Nowhere Man. He's very tempted because he comes upon a very problematic 17-year-old who, we would all like to kill, but we can't.
Yeah. Okay. What is your brainstorming process when you start a new novel? I mean, sort of touched on that a little bit, but not that much. I mean, you could maybe talk a little bit about how you build it up from the first inception.
Well, it's weird. I don't know if you have the same experience, but like as I move on, I think Dark Horse will be my 23rd book, maybe. Mm-hmm. A lot of the process, like my first 2 books, I wrote horrible rough drafts. Mm. I mean, it wasn't, I had to take them apart like an engine block and then put them back together in something that would resemble then a book. I mean, it wasn't until my 3rd book that my rough draft was like, okay, that's a template for a book. Now let me do a bunch of drafts and make it good. Yeah. And so that part for me gets better and better. It doesn't mean that the process, like the pain is embedded in the process now, but when I'm done with a first draft now, it's like the equivalent of a later draft. Mm. And brainstorming is similar in some ways. Like I think in snatches of scenes, I think here's an action thing, here's a line of dialogue, here's a conflict, constantly writing notes. And usually when I start a book, I have 13 pages of bullet points, just straight bullet points. And then I'll spend days as I start to look and shape it. That's like the clay, right? And I want to shape it into categories. Here's all the stuff from one character. Usually I know the first 2-3 scenes, right? Where they're going to lead. And I start to just shape it. And as I shape it, it grows. And I keep thinking, I'll take that and put it here. Yeah. And when I write, I have 2 big monitors. And on one is this big outline that grows and bulges out as I keep writing. And then it starts to shrink as it gets absorbed in the other. And at the very end, on this screen, I have a 400-page novel. And on this screen, that sort of rough rolling bullet point outline is empty because it's all been filled in. But it has to live and breathe all the way through for me. I can't just lock an outline and fill it in. It doesn't work.
Right. Well, this is a good question. are you able to write your novels, graphic novels and screenplays at the same time, or do you change the way you think about each style? We talked about that in one thing, but physically, are you working on one project for 6 months and then switching to another, or are you going, for the next 2 weeks, it's graphic novels and then I'm back to this or back to that?
I'd prefer to do the 6-month blocks. And as I've been fortunate enough to have more projects, it just intervenes. Like I have a rewrite due on something, I'm deep into the book, which I'm, really happy with, but I have to jump it out either at night or take a day on the weekend, or now and then I'll just clear a day and do it. I don't like doing simultaneous rough draft writing simultaneously. So with a book, like I like to get it to a real resting place and then jump into a novel, right? But some of this stuff, like I'm doing, let's say a lot of interviews, or I like with comics, I'm looking at art, right? I'm looking at lettering. And so there's sort of craft or logistical work that can interfere at the beginning and at the end of my day as it comes up. But if I'm really rough draft writing, I'll clear a day and sit down and try and like write, if I owe a comic, let's say, and it's due, the artist is ready for it. I used to just write them all in a bunch. If it was a 6-episode arc or 6-issue arc in comics, one a month for 6 months, I would write them all in a week. But now I'll kind of wait quite often. And then like, Know just go in hard on a Saturday, Sunday and try not to lose my cadence as of Monday. But I'll read the book. I'll see where I am in the book too. Cause I don't know if you ever do that. Do you write 7 days a week or? I
do write 7 days a week. Yeah. Some days when I'm further away from a deadline, it's a pretty lazy day. I'm thinking about it a lot, but I'm not as disciplined as I should be. And then, late in the process, then that's the frantic freak out time for me.
It becomes, So like, on a lot of days, sometimes if I'm doing a comic, I might just read the last chapter, right, that I did in the book, make sure it's fresh on a Saturday, let's say, add a paragraph or something on the Sunday. Like you want to keep your thumb in it a little bit. Because if I all the way out, if I leave for 2 weeks to work on a TV pilot or something, I have to like almost read the whole thing to get back into it,
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Is there a genre that you've always wanted to write but haven't written yet? A different genre?
I've written a play, but it's not been produced yet. I mean, I wrote a play ages ago and I keep kind of tempering and tinkering with it. I think that'd be really fun to have a play up on its feet.
Yeah.
I always thought it'd be interesting and fun to write a song. I don't have any musical talent. So I have a friend of mine who's rock musician of some acclaim, who's given me like the sound before, and I tried match the cadence, but I haven't been able to figure it out yet, but I just thought it would be fun. I usually just do it. I had a poem published this year for the first time. That was kind of cool. I've written short stories. I like TV. I've been lucky enough to work in TV and film, and of course novels. And so as I think of it, I kind of move into it, try it.
Yeah. So I like this question. Without giving anything away, Dark Horse includes one of the greatest battlefield upgrade scenes I've ever read. Was that scene something you set out to include, or did it happen organically on the day?
I set out to include that. I always knew. I wanted to have a couple scenes in Dark Horse, which people will get to. One where Evan has to start with a pencil that he grabs as his only weapon, and he has to escalate it. Another time, all that he has access to is a pen. And he has to keep trading it as he moves on with people until for the last one, it reaches fairly gargantuan proportions of weaponry. But it was a fun template for me to think about. I always try and think about what the internal logic or aesthetic of an action scene is. I think of action scenes as almost their own 3-act plays quite often.
Right.
What's their internal logic? Right. How are they functioning?
Yeah. Have you ever thought of doing novellas on individual characters for your series?
Well, I have a short story.
Didn't you do one for
Joey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, but I'm aware that
it was called The List, and that's available for audio. It's also available for it's on ebook. And I wanted to write a story that was centered around Josephine Morales, where Evan is the supporting character who shows up and shows out and intersects with the plot, but I really got to follow her. I love writing in her voice. She's a blast. So yeah, I do enjoy doing that.
Yeah. I mean, is that something your publisher has talked to you about wanting more of, or
I think they're thrilled.
you have your hands in so many pies that it's hard to get another series out of you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of a full series, I think it's a little tricky, and my head's always on the prize of like building the Orphan X world in those novels. But I love writing the short stories, and I've been pretty, look, publishing. What's wonderful about publishing is we're given a lot of creative leeway. We really are. It's just markedly different. From TV or film, where there's studios and networks and directors and actors, there's all sorts of stuff. And as you
literally have to speak the whole language. I mean, with us, it's basically our editor is the one we need to please, and obviously the readers. But all we see is the editor is the only one who's read it early on. But in Hollywood, I mean, that seems like a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, it is. And especially if you don't, have a center, if you don't have, leverage in some way to have confidence in what you're doing, you can't pitch unnecessary battles. You have to really watch your ego, but be creatively firm, but don't be ego firm, right? There's all this stuff that needs to be figured out to push something through. And look, fair enough. It's the movie I just had come out as a, $40 million movie. That's a lot of money that that you're asking for someone. There's gonna be opinions about it, right? There's an actor who becomes the face of it. He's gonna have, concerns about how he's portraying the role, and he should. There's a director who has to unite the vision. And so a lot of it's about picking your partner as well.
Yeah. I've had that conversation with fans because they say, if are the directors going to mess up your book and all this other stuff? And I say it's not a book. What they're doing is not a book, and they are not engineers whose job it is to replicate a page of my book into a visual format. They're artists as well, and they're creative people, and they're I want them to do what they feel is creatively the best thing they can do. I mean, obviously we've all seen, read books and then seen movies and they were crap, but at the same time, it's like, you can't say you don't want them to have the, authority to do what they think is right.
Yeah, what their job is, I think, or what our job is as a screenwriter, is to sort of take the soul of a story and to translate that. And in fact, I think some of the best adaptations, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Clockwork Orange, About Schmidt, they change a lot from the books. They're reimagined worlds around the books. Now, some of them are quite loyal and excellent. Mystic River is one. I think both book and movie are superb. And it is a lot more of a close adaptation. But quite often, the adaptations that work well are when they figure out what to do differently. Jaws is another one. Jaws is very different than the book.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a few like that. We only have a couple minutes left, but one thing I just wanted to ask you about, and we're going back to the Hollywood thing a little bit, but I know that you've worked in writers' rooms, you've worked for TV before, and that seems like, just to me, that just seems so daunting. We were just talking about the difference between, writing a novel where you just have your editor, and then the Hollywood experience with a screenplay. But to be a writer on a TV show with other writers, what is that like? And what do you take away from that? Does it make you a better novelist, or how do you look at that?
I think anything that's challenging and creative makes you better. It's like, if you don't completely screw it up. It's really interesting, the different types of writers. Like, TV writers are very rangy. There's some people who are like great in the room. They like power ideas. There's some people who hold the room together and run it on time, make sure that everything's coming in. There's some people who specialize in rewriting. There's some people who are better at dialogue. The best writers, and the ones who go the furthest, of course, can do everything, but they also have to have a real, like, a CEO mentality, right? Because they're managing, you're responsible as a showrunner. Showrunner is the most powerful position as a writer, I think, in Hollywood, right? So a writer director can be powerful, but that's because he's a director on a feature, right? But in TVs, the writers drive the medium. Directors are hired, they come and go, right? They come in for an episode and shoot it and then they're on again. Of course, there's, you think about True Detective, there's shows that have a director's imprint all the way through, but I'm talking generally. I'm generalizing a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's some of these people who can run shows. You know, one of my friends, actually Dark Horse is dedicated to 3 friends who are all writers out here. One of them is Sean Ryan, who created The Shield, and you know, he runs SWAT now. But it's amazing, like the range. If he has 2 shows going, 3 shows going, he's running 3 microeconomies, right? And he's in charge of creative control, right? The props have to be well. The rooms have to not be toxic. The actors have to feel heard and represented. The budget has to be met. The music has to be cleared. It's a lot of work. And so it's amazing kind of different skills, and it's an amazing world to be thrown into to have all this appreciation. And one thing I like about TV a lot that isn't the case as much in film is that everything's got to be done on a schedule, right? If that set shuts down, it can cost $250,000 a day. It can't shut down. So these crews are working, and the crew guys are amazing. The sound guys, the guys who build sets, the women who build sets. I mean, you know, it's incredible. And so there's something about that kind of energy that can be a bit intoxicating. Like you're all pulling forward for this. You're like trying to build this Ferrari around you while you're going 90 miles per hour, you know? And you hope it's not turning into a Pinto along the way.
Right. Yeah. Any sort of team relationship like that can be just really uplifting and make you do better. And it can also be toxic if it goes the wrong way. It can be
well, and it's so weird, man, because we're like the extent to which we're sole drivers in our world as novelists. I mean, there was a lot of adjustment for me to go in where I'm like, wait, someone has an idea, and then it goes around a writer's room, one weighs in, and like there's speed issues, there's pacing, there's attention, neither better nor worse. You know, I'm not implying one's better than the other, but it is sometimes you know, I love, one thing I love about novels is I can move at my own pace. You know, like if I'm on a tear, I can write on a tear. I don't have to slow down and clear a location or worry about budget or hear what 4 people think. You know, at the end, I have my trusted readers, my editor, my agent. You know, I have a great editor as well in the UK. It's like we all kind of can build our teams around us of who we trust, but it's not like there's, you know, daily, let alone hourly, let alone minute to minute input.
Right. It seems like a whole different animal in that respect.
That's right.
Well, Greg, it's been fun talking to you. This is great. Hopefully we can see each other in person sometime, but this is the next best thing. I've been looking forward to this. Been on my calendar for a couple months, and I'm excited.
Thanks so much, man. And I can't wait for Sierra 6.
Oh man, thank you.
Out. You know, we're, like I said, we're a week apart for Dark Horse and that. And
so, we might bump into each other in an airport or something if we're lucky, or else we'll bump each other. Bump into each other on the internet.
Or I'll be buying it in an airport. That's my other choice.
There you go. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Everybody, your book's coming out February 8th. It's called Dark Horse, and I'm enjoying the crap out of it right now. It's really good.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. It was such a pleasure to listen to this conversation. Before we all go, I want to give a thank you to all the bookstores that partnered with us on this event. We couldn't do this event series without them. They're so wonderful. So if you haven't already, go into the chat and take a look at them through the link that we've shared in there. And thanks to everyone who tuned in to watch. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mark, for taking the time with us. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you all.
Thank you, Booksellers. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.